Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
There is so much news from the past week that we had to do 2 episodes this week. Today you are stuck with just the 2 of us. We're going to start the show by breaking down the Trump conviction from the last week and what it means for the Republican nominee and the presidential race. We are then going to bring things back home and spend the remainder of the show discussing Minnesota news, starting with Monday's news that all charges against Trooper Ryan Londregan were dropped. We will break down the reason behind that and the comments swirling following the announcement. We will then get into the recent news in the Feeding Our Future scandal and break down the shocking revelation that a juror received $120,000 in cash at her home if she would vote to find the defendants on trial not guilty. And we will end with a little foray into sports by breaking down the new Justin Jefferson contract and what that means for the Vikings. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. So last week, Trump was found guilty on all 34 felony counts. Jury came back pretty quickly and really just no questions in their mind. And so this again all surrounds the Stormy Daniels hush money case that was being heard in New York. What's your take? Was this surprising? Did you expect them to come back and come back so quickly, 34 across the board?
I was surprised by the 34. It was a complete and total repudiation of Trump's defense. 34, he's now a convicted felon. I had followed the case. I'd learned some things in following the case. I was not following it incredibly closely, but it's a serious issue and it's a serious complication. I've listened to a number of legal analysts on the case, but I think it's a substantive issue for Trump. He's now a convicted felon, 34 felonies. We can talk more about the political ramifications of it, but 34 was surprising. And it was there's no ambiguity. 34 convictions to now be a convicted felon is a substantive issue. I think it's a messaging problem for Republicans. I think there's some legal issues that Trump is going to have to deal with. The timing of it is also going to be interesting because I think his sentencing hearing is pretty much right before the Republican National Convention. And so it's going to be very interesting to see from a sentencing standpoint what he's dealing with the week of the Republican National Convention.
Absolutely agree. Now, this is one of those situations where jail time could be on the table. I think, while I maybe did a year of law school, you know a lot more about the idiosyncrasies, the specifics of all of sorts of court cases and follow a lot of that. From your thought, what you've heard, what you've read, what you know, do you think there would be any time behind bars for the former president?
I think it's possible. I think it's unlikely. I think it's possible, but I think it's unlikely. I do think that these are 34 felonies. These are, I think, low level, from what I understand, low level felonies. And so I do think there is a probationary, I do think that, not probation, but I do think that there is a path here, a glide path for him to not go to jail. Now, that being said, one of the reasons he has been convicted by a jury of his peers. We can get into the whole discussion on the appeal process or everything like that. But in the eyes of the court, the process is over in terms of he was convicted. And just in my rudimentary understanding of courts and what I've seen, contrition, apologizing, accepting responsibility factors in a lot into what the judge determines. And I don't think that Donald Trump, if he chooses to speak in court in the presence of the judge, if that gels with what he says outside of the courtroom, there's not a lot of contrition in what he's going to say. And that's where we get into a little bit of the reality that Trump lives in versus what's the real world. He has been convicted. There is an appellate process. And independent of that appellate process, there's still opportunities for this judge to give him a sentence that includes him being in jail. I have heard very fair legal analysis that has said that it would be very reasonable for someone who wasn't named Donald Trump to go to jail for what he's done here. These are 34 felony convictions based on his record and some of the other based on the complexities of this case. I have seen it presented both ways. I've seen it presented that he's not going to go to jail, but I've also heard some people who are giving fair legal analysis down the middle of the plate that it's very reasonable for Trump to go to jail. And if he doesn't go to jail, that could be an indication of there being truly a two-tier justice system. which is which is what the many Republicans and people in the MAGA world are saying, is that this was an unjust prosecution. He wasn't guilty of anything, and the prospects of him going to jail, to them, not only are just as bad, if not worse, than the fact that he was even prosecuted to begin with. And so, I think that him going to jail is a possibility. I think it's unlikely, but I also will say to you, if we want to play the game on the two-tier justice system, I think there is a credible argument that could be made that if his name wasn't Donald Trump and he wasn't a former president, that he may be doing some jail time for this.
Interesting take. I definitely think it's one of those situations where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's going to be outrage on both sides regarding this. You've talked a little bit about the messaging angle. We've already seen Biden come out messaging him as a convicted felon. We know that Republicans are going to have to figure out how to dance on this, because regardless of you're the biggest Trump flag waving Republican or more moderate, your base has thoughts on this. And we're also seeing, from the flip side of what some of the Democrats are saying, some of these never Trumpers, middle of the road, formerly Clinton or independent supporting folks, saying that they are now going to come and support Trump because this is a weaponization of the judicial system, and the political motivation used in this trial in their minds is reason enough that they want to turn right and stay away from the Democrats. I don't know that we'll know how this plays out until Election Day. We'll see some polls. Previously, we had talked about some polls about this, and largely Republicans said that they're going to stay with Trump. I did see one this week that said 1 in 10 formerly Trump supporters are now thinking of looking elsewhere. Again, that is a make or break it. So we'll see what people ultimately decide to do. But I think one thing that is important too is people's memory is rather short. And so this is incumbent on Republicans to remind voters what Democrats and Biden's policies how they have impacted their lives. And hopefully that cuts through more than a convicted felon. But it's going to be a tough thing to navigate for these Republican members or candidates going into 2024 for sure.
From a messaging standpoint, particularly in the presidential race, when we did a lot of analysis on the presidential race, and we talked with a lot of smart people about where we thought the race was going, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we both were hoping that someone would be a substantive contrast to Trump and take that messaging mantle from him and be more, and this would stop being as much of a Trump party. What I'm surprised about, not surprised, but I just want to acknowledge, I guess I'm not as surprised as I am anymore, but 34 felony convictions. And there was one particular message that was sent out by Larry Hogan. Now, Larry Hogan is the former governor of Maryland, and he is now running for the United States Senate. He sent out a message after the Trump verdict. And this is what he said. He goes, quote, "At this dangerously divided moment in our history, all leaders, regardless of party, must not pour fuel on the fire with more toxic partisanship." He went on to say, "We must reaffirm what has made this nation great, the rule of law." A very simple, I think, balanced and non-controversial statement. At the dangerously divided moment in our history, all leaders, regardless of party, must not pour fuel on the fire with more toxic partisanship. We must reaffirm what has made this nation great, the rule of law. He was hammered up and down on social media for offering that statement. And again, his statement was just, let's respect the rule of law. And I do think that there's an inconsistency that Democrats have on the rule of law and with Republicans. I mentioned before that there's been an argument that's been made that the Democrats have messaging quite consistently that on Trump the lawbreaker, Trump the lawbreaker, Trump the lawbreaker. Then what we had Senator Mitchell, a DFL state senator from Woodbury, get charged with a felony related to a break-in at a home of her stepmother up in northwestern Minnesota. And so I thought that they've lost a little bit of that messaging high ground by making the claim that felons and people that are charged with felonies and people that are going through the criminal justice system are not worthy of voting. And Republicans were quite forceful in saying that Mitchell should not be able to vote and she shouldn't be able to participate in the legislative process because of the charges that were convicted. I will say to you that I think that it's inconsistent for Republicans to say that Mitchell needs to be gone and she shouldn't be the 34th vote just when she's been charged with something, and then turned an absolute blind eye to what's going on with Trump. And for Larry Hogan, former Governor Hogan, now running for the Senate, to come out and say that what he wants people just to reaffirm is that what made this nation great, the rule of law. And I think we've lost that. I think that partisanship, I think that the Republicans believe very strongly that there has been a politicization and a weaponization of the court process. Their response to that is to also, I think, weaponize rhetorically and laying the groundwork to do if Trump is reelected. I think that the Republicans aren't ruling out what they perceive Democrats have done to Donald Trump. And that's the distinction here, is that I don't think, I will say this very clearly. I have a very consistent point. I believe your point is consistent too, but I don't want to speak for you. We did not believe that Senator Mitchell should be voting in the Minnesota Senate because of what had happened. I don't believe that Donald Trump, prior to his convictions, I think the legal issues that he was facing, along with a whole host of other issues, called into question his ability to serve as president. I believe that is 34 times more difficult now that he's a convicted felon. What I find interesting is I'd love to do a diagram, a Venn diagram of the people who were critical of Nicole Mitchell and Senator Mitchell for voting and are now seem to not be concerned at all about that fact that Donald Trump has been convicted of 34 felonies. And I think that just because you've been convicted of a crime does not mean you can't serve. But the question of surrounding the convictions and what you've gone through, there are people that have served president, served as vice president, served in elective office with criminal records. The question is, what were the records? Did they learn from them? And I don't think the Democrats nor the Republicans have clean hands at all about the weaponization, rhetorically, about the politicization or weaponization of the court system. I don't think either side has clean hands. The distinction, what I find so tragic and sad, is Larry Hogan coming out and saying, at this dangerously divided moment in our history, all leaders, regardless of party, must not pour fuel on the fire with more toxic partisanship. We must reaffirm what has made this nation great, the rule of law. And that there is just this visceral, harsh reaction to that relatively, I think, patriotic, simple, common sense proposition. And we've lost that. And it's just really disappointing.
I completely agree. I think his statement was great. It's surprising, but not surprising, like you said, that he got the backlash that he did. And I don't know how we get back there, but hopefully at some point we can get back there, because supporting the rule of law used to not be controversial at all. One thing I do want to play a little devil's advocate. Do you think that there's an argument to be made that the Senator Mitchell Trump situations are different because Mitchell's happened while she was already in office, whereas Trump's happened prior to him becoming in office, and that's where a difference happens? Or do you think that doesn't matter, that you have to stand for, again, and Mitchell's is an alleged crime where Trump is now convicted?
So you're in the scenario that you're describing, which is more serious?
I'm saying that Republicans here in the state, I would argue, would probably say hers happened while she was in office. She's supposed to be more upstanding because she has an election certificate, whereas Trump's happened prior to him receiving his election certificate.
Yes, but he's the front runner for the nominee.
Right.
Nomination.
Yes.
He's likely going to be. The question that I would say is,
but the crime happened not while he was actually serving as president.
Sure. And I get that point. I would say to you, I think there are some crimes that if you commit, they are completely disqualifying to serving in office, regardless of what your level of contrition is. And I don't want to articulate all those but I just would say I think there are. I think that people can. I think that the question is the consistency argument. In my point is that
absolutely
we have a state senator who the argument was made, and I stand by it, which is that there are 34. She was the 34th vote to help pass the DFL's legislative agenda, and she was credibly accused and was facing felony charges. I think that the Democrats played absolute partisanship with that in terms of the sense of what did they do? Becky, they were the first to punish her in terms of removing her committee assignments and removing her from caucus. Then what they did is they immediately did that. And then they had this ethics committee process where I think State Senator Bobby Joe Champion did everything he can to prevent there being a thoughtful discussion in the context of the ethics committee process on what was actually done. And I think the behavior of Senator Mitchell and her attorney in the context of a legislative process was simply horrific. Then what happened is the Democrats did use her 34th vote to pass some of their agenda. And then after session was over with, what did they do? The chair of the DFL and the governor both called on her to resign. The material facts of Senator Mitchell's case did not change between when before the session, during the session, and after. There's no new information that's come out. The only reason why they were speaking out with such clear, forceful language after the legislative session was because her vote was no longer needed, and so it was safe for them to speak out. In this particular, and so nothing materially changed. And so in some instances, they're taking the same position that the Republicans have said, which is that she needs to resign, that she shouldn't be a part of the process. The problem, I think, for Republicans now is how do you make the case that Senator Mitchell can't serve in the Senate if she's convicted of, right now she's been charged, okay? Yep. If she decides to stay in office and gets convicted, Republicans are about to nominate someone who was convicted of 34 felony counts. And so how do Republicans credibly go out and message and say that Senator Mitchell's conduct is unbecoming of being a senator, while a state senator, while someone who has been nominated and may be elected by a major political party has 34 felony convictions on them, and it's still through the appellate process? I think that is not a consistent statement, and it's mind-boggling to me. And if we're getting down to that's what this felony is versus that felony, and one was politicization, one was not, I just have to say to you, that's just a very slippery slope. And I think we're on a consistent point because I think we have called out, and again, please disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but we've called out saying from a partisan, from a process standpoint, we thought that Mitchell should step down, that what she's done here warranted her stepping down. Now, others can disagree, but now we have a situation of where we have the Republican nominee for president has been convicted of 34 felonies. And sure, he has an appellate process, but him appealing doesn't remove the facts of what they are. He has been found guilty by a court of law, 34 felony counts. And I think that from a messaging standpoint, I think the Republicans are in a very slippery slope, very slippery slope, because I think that, and I'm not trying to say the Democrats don't have an issue either, because they do, but 34 is different than what? And that's the issue here and I think that there should be various standards throughout the process, but I think this is going to be a messaging. I'll also say it's inconsistent, I think, because Republicans, at least when I came up into the party process, Republicans were more law and order. They generally supported law enforcement and they supported the rule of law. I have a real it really stretches my mind, because what's also been happening with Republicans is they've been parroting, remove some of the FBI funding, dismantle the Department of Justice, do all these types of stuff. And the rhetoric is a shade bit different, because everyone knows that about the defund the police movement inside the Democratic Party in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. Now, but there are also Republicans who you basically just flip one of the flags between a Biden supporter and a Trump supporter, change the uniform, and it's basically the same message that we have overly aggressive, whether it's a police force or whether it's a legal system, and both of them need to, in some ways, be defunded and clawed back. And I think that's a very inconsistent message for Republicans who've generally been on the side of police and law and order. I think if you are a Republican, and this is, I think, the most puzzling Republican, I think, to be, is someone who is a Trump supporter, who thinks January 6th wasn't an issue, who thinks that he's done nothing wrong, that all of these convictions were problematic, and that you still try to claim that you back the blue and you back law enforcement. I don't know how you can credibly make that point. I just don't know how you can credibly do that.
I don't disagree. It's going to be, I am not envious of folks who are working on messaging and prepping candidates and electeds this cycle, because it is everything you say can have the opportunity to be twisted, just all of the ways you have pointed out. And I think it is really going to be walking on eggshells to not do something or say something that gets your side more in trouble and gets yourself more as something that is able to be splashed on a mailer and used against you this cycle because of saying something that could be taken at, if we're looking at Republican candidates, something that somebody could say is now not supporting President Trump or vice versa. And so I think it's going to be a really tightrope for them to walk, and not envious of that at all. But I do want to talk a little bit about what we have seen since the conviction. And it's been quite the support financially for the Trump campaign and the RNC. They raised $70 million in the 48 hours after the conviction. They have since put out some information saying that 30% of those contributors were new donors. This is nearly double the previous single-day fundraising haul on WinRed, which is the fundraising platform that Republicans use. And the platform WinRed actually crashed briefly in the 24 hours after the conviction because it was so overloaded with support and donations. Not shocking to me. I assume not shocking to you either.
This is Trump's party. Make no mistake about it, that this is Trump's party. If you are a non-Trump Republican, it's not your party anymore. And it's part of the reason I describe myself as politically homeless, because in the grand scheme of things, and there's a great op-ed that I'm gonna send around in the notes to this story. But Philip Bump with the Washington Post wrote this fantastic kind of a column about how non-Trumpers are reminded that the party isn't really theirs. And this is the exact type of situation. I completely understand the amount of money that was raised. That is massive. There is a visceral reaction that people are having to this. And that is, Trump is the head of the party. And so from a strategy standpoint, I understand, and this is what I get puzzled by, because those numbers are overwhelming. Just from a partisan standpoint, just from a raw number standpoint, from a red versus blue, let's discuss this whole legal mess that Trump has gone through, this conviction, just through the reds versus the blues. The reds did very well after Trump was convicted. They've raised a bunch of money. You've articulated it very well. And 30% of them are new donors. The WinRed platform crashed. That is a significant amount of money. And I learned in the early days of politics, very early on in one of my first jobs, that fundraising is one of the best indicators of where the public is on stuff and where people are, small donors and large donors. And I guarantee you the 70 million that the Trump campaign and the RNC raised, there were some advertised big dollar amounts, but a lot of these are probably very small donors who feel that this system isn't fair and that 34 convictions and what he was charged with here is excessive, and they have decided to be a donor to the Trump campaign. I don't see from a legal standpoint, and I don't believe, first of all, let me just also say, I don't believe that this is some orchestrated conspiracy by the Biden administration. I know that Republicans want to say that this is the Biden, he was prosecuted by the Biden administration, the DOJ is behind this. Republicans have to pick a lane. Either Joe Biden is Sleepy Joe, who doesn't know what's going on, or he's this mastermind who's orchestrating all this stuff behind the scenes. So pick a side. I do not believe that all of this has been orchestrated, because the reason why I don't think it's been orchestrated all behind the scenes is because I think that what we are seeing is, once again, that the normal rules of politics do not apply to Donald Trump. 34 felony convictions would be decimating to most people in politics. But he is, as I've said before, he is the new Teflon president. He is what Reagan was when I was growing up, just the Teflon president, about stuff not sticking to him and him being able to navigate through. Reagan wasn't faced with any of these types of legal challenges. Those were just rhetorical disagreements where they were not finding a way in which things to stick to him. Donald Trump is absolutely the new Teflon president. And so in a normal circumstance, Becky, a candidate facing 34 convictions would be an end of the race. But look at the fundraising numbers. And I think that the normal rules of politics don't apply. And I think prognosticating on it is difficult. Observing it, I think, is so important. And the amount of money the RNC raised, boy, there's some other legal challenges that he's facing this year. And I understand from the perspective of listening to lawyers that some are more serious than others. Boy, oh boy, 34 felony convictions, and this has not been much of a blip on the radar screen in terms of hitting, and I remember phrase that, in terms of hurting Trump.
Right.
It hasn't hurt him much yet.
It's as you mentioned, it would eviscerate any other candidate and largely any other person, right? If this was a CEO or a teacher or a doctor that was convicted, no one else gets to keep their job, let alone get another 4 years of that. So it is, you're right, Teflon president. It's wild to watch, and there's still other cases out there. We're going to see and hear more. Like you mentioned, sentencing is right before the RNC. So I'm sure we'll talk about it again in mid-July when that is. One last comment I want to make on this is something that is a smart move by the Trump campaign, but I had something I hadn't even thought of or heard before. Apparently, one of the Trump co-campaign managers they've been telling down ballot Republicans to not fundraise off the conviction because basically the money is theirs. There is a quote that says, any Republican elected official, candidate, or party committee siphoning money from President Trump's donors are no better than Judge Merchant's daughter. We're keeping a list. We'll be checking it twice, and we are not in the spirit of Christmas. Ooh, they want all that money for themselves, don't they?
That is a tough comment. That is a very tough comment. And wow, yes. And when I had heard about this initially, I thought that the Trump campaign was upset because people were mentioning the case. And so if
That would make sense.
so when someone explained it to me, they said, no, they want all the money for their kitty. That is a situation where I was a little bit like, wowza, that's really interesting. That's really interesting that they want all that money, because that's a hell of a way in which to frame things up. Because it's not as if they're upset that they just want all of it themselves, because they know it's just a mobilization financial gold mine for their campaign. They don't want anyone else taking it.
Absolutely. They want all of it for themselves. And that's certainly clear. It is, yeah, I got to say, it is a smart move for their side. They know that this is going to be a cash cow. They're keeping it for themselves. And we certainly know that President Trump and his team holds grudges. I hope and bet that many people do not cross that line. Now we are moving back here to Minnesota. We are going to talk about the recent announcement on Sunday evening. Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty announced that charges against Trooper Ryan Londregan would be dropped. This again is following, we previously discussed this case a little bit more in depth, but this is about the incident where there was a death of an individual and Ryan Londregan was charged with murder in this case. We notably talked about the situation where she caught a little fire for dismissing the use of force expert that the office had hired, who'd found that Londregan's actions were not unreasonable given the facts of the case. Again, this dismissal comes after basically what they're claiming maybe new information, new evidence, and prosecutors determined they could no longer prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Londregan's actions were not an authorized use of force by a peace officer. So they decided to drop the case. We'll chat a little bit more about what has happened since this announcement, but are you surprised that she finally saw the writing on the wall, or is it just that's got to be it, right? She saw that there was really no case to bring forward. She didn't have the support. This case was likely going to be taken away from her, and that's why she had to step down or drop the charges, correct?
We've discussed this case at length, and there's been a number of legal issues that have been raised about how this case was brought forth and whether there was enough to charge Trooper Lundgren. I am not surprised that she dropped the case, because that's where I think that this was trending. I think that the analysis that we've had about this case, what's been out there in the public, has been pretty convincing. And I think the trepidation that the governor has had and others have had of her same political party, but how her approach has been to this case. What I am surprised by is the manner in which she dropped it, and what her messaging has been, both on Sunday and yesterday about this case. Her messaging has been really raw about why this case was dropped and how she messaged it. And there should be no confusion anymore with anyone as to who Mary Moriarty is and what she stands for and what she believes. And we've discussed this before, that she's governing the same way that she campaigned. I don't think there's an inconsistency in how she campaigned versus how she's governing. I think that this race was not on the attention of a lot of people. And this is why paying attention to a down ballot race is so significantly important, because I think she's out of step with the mainstream. She's out of step where Hennepin County wants to be. And I think that she's running into some issues inside her own party and with other, and how she's processing this case. And I'm not surprised that she dropped the charges. I am surprised at how she's messaging on this and why she's dropping the charges and how she's discussing it, because she is fired up.
Certainly is. There has been a lot of pressure on this case to take this and to take it away from her. Governor Walz has now said that he was planning to remove Moriarty from the prosecution of this case. And I really want to hear your take on this, because we just went through a little bit of our tangent about the Senator Mitchell and the political ramifications and all of the different dancing around of things that Chair Martin and Governor Walz saying, oh, now she should step down. Now, after she dropped the case, they said, oh, yeah, but I was going to take it away from her anyways. A little politically expedient, correct?
Yes. Do you think I view it as that those conversations were going on behind the scenes, and so she dropped the case because it was going to get taken away from her.
And be embarrassing.
Yes. Do you see it that way? Because
I
view it as
Yes, I do. I just think him now commenting on that too is just a little too cute by half, right? It's
yes.
of course you were. Nice try. Like, why weren't you out there saying this? Why weren't you doing this? There has been time. The writing has been on the wall. All of her antics surrounding this case have been completely inappropriate. And it's just he wants to get that feather in his cap and be able to have this little mark on his report card for the year. But you still didn't do it.
Yes. And I always think that there's always time to do the right thing. And from the beginning, this case, there have been issues between the Attorney General's office, the governor's office, and the Hennepin County Attorney with Mary Moriarty. This isn't the first dust up that they've had. This one, I think, became much more of a public issue in terms of just how it was framed from the beginning. And it is very surprising to me, because I do think that there was an opportunity for the governor's office to step in much before this. I also will say to you, I do believe that she dropped it because it was going to get taken away from her. And it seems to me that if I can't have it, no one else is going to have it. And so she dropped it in such a way, and she messaged on it in such a way that I think is really divisive. And again, she went through the process. She was the DFL endorsed candidate for Hennepin County Attorney. She was duly elected. She is campaigning. She is governing, I believe, the same way that she campaigned. And I do believe that I don't think there's I've mentioned this phrase before about truth in advertising. I think she's governing the exact way that she planned to govern and and handle these cases as county attorney. I think that there is a lot of buyer's remorse that I think people have. And I think that people are going to pay attention much more to these county attorney races, because I think that, again, unless you disagree with me, I think she's governing exactly how she said she was going to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned it was exactly why people need to pay attention to down ballot. If a person tells you who they are, listen, right? And I don't think, because I do think largely we do see a more radical candidate on the campaign trail than we often get in office. We see it tamped down a little bit, and she certainly hasn't done that. And she's been guns ablazing since Sunday. So her office did say the rumors about the case being taken away from her are not why she made the ultimate decision to dismiss the case. I think that we agree that it largely played into that. But you mentioned a little bit about some of the inflammatory language in her messaging since this announcement has been made. And I didn't see this one coming. But Moriarty said that Governor Walz has never contacted her during any of this prosecution of this case. And she said that she thinks that he was going to take it away from her. I think it's because I'm a queer woman in this role, she told the Star Tribune. I think it's because he looks at the political winds and which way they're blowing, and I think that's what he reacts to, which is horrible. If we want people to trust the system, that's not the way to do it. She's accusing the governor of the state of Minnesota of sexism, of homophobia. Those are some harsh, inflammatory remarks.
Yes. She has literally she's just gassed this entire situation. And that's appalling. And I think that I think that there is fair criticism that can be leveled on the governor and on his administration. I do not think that Governor Walz's administration in any way could be labeled in a manner in which that she's labeling it. I don't think that's the issue. I know that we don't get to, sometimes people get to speak their truths, and I understand that they could do that. The bottom line is I think that's just preposterous to think that's what's going on here. And I think that she's responding in a way that I think is showing why I think she's not a good prosecutor, that this is not a good role for her. And I think that I listened to Chris Maddle's interview. I listened to her interview. I listened to the governor's perspective on this. I think she is out of step with where this state is, what the public wants in terms of public safety, what the response they want there to be from their elected officials. And I think that I also will say to you that, and Becky, please disagree with me, I don't think that she's operating how she said she wasn't going to operate. I think she's doing exactly what she said she was going to do. And voters, this should be a lesson that you need to pay attention, because I think that this is how she planned on governing or leading that office if she was elected. I just don't think it's a good fit for her. I don't think I don't think in this day and age, I think how she wants to lead in that office is out of step with where Minnesotans are and where the residents of Hennepin County are. And again, she's the Hennepin County attorney, but she's the county attorney for the largest county in the state. And so the lens of how cases are prosecuted, that county gets a lot of attention. And I think her language is incendiary. And I think that I was very taken aback by what she said. I want to be sensitive because I'm a white dude from the suburbs. I don't know it from her perspective. I look at the Walz administration and I have a very difficult time believing that they're not an inclusive administration. I was taken aback by that. It's very surprising rhetoric, very surprising language. If she truly feels that way, there needs to be some substantive follow-up from her to validate why she feels that way. Because how it comes across to me, and please push back if you think I'm wrong, I don't think that stuff just happens in a vacuum. And how it looks to me, and please challenge me if you think I'm wrong, but how it looks to me is she's taking this case, she's dropping the charges because this case was going to be taken away from her, which is what the governor's office can do. She caught wind that was going to happen because there has now been information out there that there were phone conversations going on. And I think that's where this was trending. She then dropped all the charges. She then took ownership of the case from a messaging standpoint, and she was the one to deliver why the charges in this case were being dropped. She is throwing every conceivable reason as to why this case is being charged in there, and she's using some incredibly powerful language about why she feels that happened. I am not being dismissive in any way of what she's saying. I just think that just didn't happen overnight. And if she is feeling, as she's quoted, that's a very substantive criticism to lob towards any elected official, but particularly the governor. She has a responsibility to speak up and to provide more context and information to explain that. Am I wrong in that? Because can you push back?
Nope. I completely double down, not push back. I with you, don't want to discount anybody's feelings or experiences, but this is a really big allegation to lob, like you said, at the governor. And so if there is something, if there are comments or emails or text messages or conversations that made her feel that way, then maybe that's a conversation that should be had at least between the two offices. But if you're saying this in public, you got to have a little bit to back it up here. I think that we've talked about this, right? Over the last 8 or 9 months, 10 months, it was last July. So we've been discussing this. The public has been looking at this. There has been many different situations along the way, different incidences, different fumbling of this case to show that this the charges were not right to be dropped, that their use of force was reasonable to the experts from the training manuals, all of these different things, and that she was taking a political stance in her actions here. So it's not like this, just like you said, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like it was just stripped from her with no reason, with no public outcry over the last year. It's all been laid out. We all understand it. So then again, to have this comment, we either need a little bit more, or you got to take that comment back, because that is just really wild. And it's very clear she's defensive. She doesn't actually support what she's doing, but she knows she had to do it, is my final say on that situation.
It's a really harsh comment, I think. And again, as we have her quote here, I think it's because I'm a queer woman in this role. Wow. Again, I want to strike the balance here of, I want to make sure that, and it's something that we've talked about a lot, Becky, which is we want to make sure that we're listening and we're having spaces where people can talk and have those types of discussions. Simultaneously, that is an incredibly significant statement for the Hennepin County attorney to make the charge of the governor, that the reason why she's being treated the way she is in this role by the governor is because she's a queer woman. That is just a very strong statement to make. And if she believes that, supporting evidence to why she believes that needs to be discussed in the public, because that is a substantive charge to lob at the governor of this state or to lob at any public official. She is in essence saying that the governor of this state is engaging in bigotry towards her and he's treating her different. And I just have a very difficult time from my lens and from my viewpoint of a white straight guy from the suburbs and how I view the Walz administration, the Walz-Flanagan administration, and the entire DFL party, to think that that type of perspective is actually how she feels. Because in the context it's bringing up and why it's being brought up is it's being brought in just at a time when she's losing a case. And I have a feeling, my hunch, and the reason why I think she needs to expand on that more is because we need to remove the context of this case and let's get into some incidents. Let's talk a little bit about that relationship, because if you truly feel that the governor of the state is acting that way, it shouldn't just come up as a messaging point when you drop the charges in a significant case. I have a difficult time believing it. And the reason why, I'm not saying that Mary Moriarty doesn't feel that way, but I think by asking for specifics and framing that out more and discussing it more, I think will bring to light whether this is what's actually going on here. I want there to be good, respectful relationships, working relationships and partnerships. There does need to be a good partnership between the governor's office and the Hennepin County Attorney's office. And if she feels that way, that issue needs to be resolved. It shouldn't be litigated in the context of a criminal case where we have a person that was shot, that was killed, and we have a state trooper. That's not the arena where that should be dealt with, because we have discussed this case very responsibly. There is still someone that died, and there's a law enforcement officer that took a life. And that is a very serious issue. And that issue needs to be discussed as to why that happened, because I've watched the video. I've seen the case that's been presented through the lens of the public. I've listened to you discuss it. I've listened to our guests discuss it. And I believe the case was not properly charged. Simultaneously, there is someone that is dead, and we should be talking about that, but not in the lens of criminal charges. But she's just very much complicated this issue in a way in which I think shows her inability to fit well in this role. Am I going to get in trouble for describing it that way?
Not at all. I think that's very well said. I think it is troubling and questionable of how this came out, and I'm sure we will hear a little bit more of it. For the record, Walz denied the bias played into his comments. He was in an interview and said, "That's false. Next question." So if there is anything more to it, we might hear more, but I'm on your side. I don't doubt that Mary Moriarty has, as a queer woman, probably dealt with really sexist, bigoted, homophobic comments and actions and statements against her. I do not doubt that. I think everybody probably in the LGBTQ community can relate to having that. I, again, straight white woman, have different experiences in life. So I don't want to, like you said, downplay that. But I think we've made it clear that this is a hard place to have that comment made without any evidence, without anything to back it up, when we also should be just focusing on the case at hand, which you just laid out very well. So we'll bring it back up if there's more to be said and more comes from it. But I do want to keep us moving and into another court case. Man, some chaos and drama in Minnesota court cases this week. Like our listeners probably are well aware, Feeding Our Future scandal that has been talked about in the news for the better part of the last year or two here. This week, Monday was supposed to be the closing remarks. It was the closing remarks in the case against 7 defendants. They're accused of fraudulently getting $49 million in federal funds intended to feed children by vastly inflating the number of meals given away at 50 locations across the state. Prosecutors say they used money to buy luxury cars, houses, jewelries, and properties. Very little food. More than 5 dozen other defendants have been either charged or pleaded guilty or awaiting trial. So there's all sorts of other things going on. But what we're going to talk about in this case specifically, yesterday, Monday morning, it was announced that over the weekend, I think on Sunday, a bag of cash was dropped off at one of the jurors' homes to her father-in-law who received it. There was a promise of more if the juror voted to acquit. It should be noted that this individual was handing a bag of cash essentially to, was the only person of color on the jury. She is an Asian American. She is 23 years old, also the youngest on the jury, as we're told. And there was $123,000 in that gift bag. Now, this juror immediately, when she got home and was told about this or given it whatever from her father-in-law, immediately called 911, called the police to report it. Wow. Have you ever heard of anything like this? This is like mobs, right? This is the backroom dealings of the mobsters and the mafia of paying off jurors. $123,000 with promises of more. What?
It's amazing. You're exactly right. I could not believe this. I was offline a little bit on Monday, and when I was catching back up on the news, I'm like, am I reading this correctly? I mean, this is just astounding. The amount of money in cash, everything you laid out about this is just amazing. And it's spot on. It's absolutely something you would read in a crime novel. It's absolutely something you would read in crime stories. It sounds absolutely like a mob type situation. I will note out on something. I don't remember who said it, but it was Max with the Reformer, who put out a little a tweet and said he was crossing his fingers that the person had a Ring doorbell camera so they can see this type of stuff. I have to say to you something, and just
I think they said that she did.
Okay, so on a non-criminal front, did you ever play Ding Dong Ditch when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah.
So yes, I played a lot of Ding Dong Ditch when I was a kid. And I think one of the challenges these days that kids aren't able to experience is Ring doorbells have just ruined the concept of Ding Dong Ditch. I think Ding Dong Ditch was fantastic. I loved playing it. I did it quite extensively, got in a lot of trouble doing it, but it totally diminishes. I think Ring doorbells are fantastic and the video camera doorbell, but it ruins that type of stuff. And so this is astounding because it was just left on the front door. It was just left out there. And if she has a Ring camera, this is unbelievable. And the cash, the amount of money. By the way, can we just pause for a second and just say kudos to the juror for speaking up and doing that? If you want to have faith in the jury process, kudos to this juror who has an absolute target on their back now. Not only was this juror targeted in terms of the money, but I've watched enough mob movies to know, and you can offer this as the legal analyst. When you turn down someone's bribe, I don't think that generally ends well, right? That doesn't usually end well. And so not only the bravery of this person for reporting it and doing what she did, she has got a very serious, I want to be careful with my language. I hope that she's receiving the proper protection, surveillance, and that she's being monitored, because this was an incredibly brave thing that she did in terms of speaking up. And what a ridiculous situation that we live in with this Feeding Our Futures and what's gone on here. Someone needs to write, this needs to be like a Netflix series or some type of, because this is something I've never seen before. This amount of cash. And then again, just the juror speaking up. What would you have done?
I would like to think I would have done the same thing. But as you mentioned, how terrifying. Yeah.
There's no question you would have done the right thing.
Yeah.
You would have you would there's no question you would have done the right thing. I'm surprised you not have
No, I
you
would have
absolutely would
done
have
the
done
right thing,
there's no
but
question.
you have to I not only the bravery, but, like, when does anybody just have $123,000 in front of them? I think it's just wild, and with the promise of more, and so as this all came out, they had to gather up the jurors and take them in one by one, ask them if anybody has contacted them. They are not aware why the juror who is now dismissed from the case, they're not aware of what happened there, but they essentially are now sequestered, phones removed. They're not able to talk to anybody about this. They showed up at the courthouse with the clothes on their back and maybe whatever, if a bag, a personal item. They didn't pack clothes. They don't have a toothbrush. They had to call their families. And these are employees who are obviously off for the time of their jury trial. Their parents, they've got obligations outside of this, and for their lives to now be sequestered and hunkered down, and obviously probably a little bit of fearfulness that comes from that because they don't know all that's going on, but they were just asked if anybody has contacted them or their family, has to allow them to have alarm bells going off in their head a little bit of what that might mean. And I can only imagine this. To be that juror, they know where you live. It's not only like they know your name and they contacted you, but they showed up at your house. That's got to
Yes.
be horrifying and so violating.
Yes, and the brazenness of it is just astounding to me. The brazenness, dropping it off again. Not want to draw too much on the ding dong ditch example, but it's you can't just drive down someone's street anymore and just do things under the cover of darkness. And I don't think it was done under the cover of darkness. Just the aggressiveness and just the that we live in the type of state where $120,000 in cash is just dropped off in a gift bag at someone's door. Just imagine the type of operation. The other thing I want to go into in just for a second. By the way, first of all, let me just be clear. There's no question you would have dropped it off. You would
Yeah.
have absolutely done the right thing. You wouldn't even hesitate. You probably would have counted it to make sure that, and you would have made sure that no one got anywhere near that money. Okay. You would have done everything right. The question I have is, have you ever been a member of a jury?
No, I got called up one time and I had to call in for, showed up the first day. I had to call in the next 4 days in the morning to see if my group got called, and I never did.
I've not been a member of a jury. My wife was a member of a jury, and interestingly enough, she was a member of a jury, and they questioned her about me before she was on the jury. I was interesting. But what I would say to you
I don't
is,
think they would want you or I.
I
I
don't.
don't think
Yes,
we'd get accepted.
but let me just be clear with you. I think you would take it very seriously, and you would be a great juror.
I
I
would
think you
love
would
to.
you would do a great job. I think you would take it so seriously. By the way, if you haven't watched that TV series about the jury on
Law
Amazon
and
Prime,
Order.
no, oh no,
Oh,
yes, that is
Jury
absolutely
Duty. Oh
yes,
my
it
God.
is
One of the
so good.
best shows
It is
ever.
so good. It is absolutely so good. But let me just say to you something. As I understand the jury process from the criminal trials that I've observed, is that sometimes the jurors' names are known. And so the question is, I'm trying to figure out someone must have, because the jury was not sequestered, and getting the jurors' names, someone must have been in the courtroom observing this because the names having covered some criminal trials, the jury process, there is a discussion on the jurors' names, and you get an idea as to who they are. Sometimes they're not known, but the prosecutors, I think it's called voir dire. Is that the process of selecting a juror? And so I want to guess the point I'm saying. It was a lot of steps that needed to be taken to find the juror that you wanted to target, B, get their contact information, and then deliver information out. That was a multi-step process. And it's really surprising that all of that undeveloped in that courtroom that there were people there observing it. And it really brings up a mob underworld approach to going on to this case. And it's really, really shocking. I guess it's really not that shocking because of what the underlying case is, but the fact that someone has that amount of money, and as you articulated, more could come if they did this, it's just shocking. It's absolutely shocking.
As you brought up, so there was a lot of developments in this case and how it's being conducted yesterday evening or a Monday evening. But as you mentioned, only the defendants, the defense, and the prosecutors know the jury's name. As this came out, the defendants still had their cell phones. One did start texting immediately. The judge froze their cell phones. They immediately confiscated them. They have since gotten there was a search warrant issued for the defendants' phones where they are now going through and seeing if there is any evidence, text messages, communications that would tie any of the defendants to this situation, because it does obviously, it would appear that there's some benefit to the defendants. Whether it was they were known or not is the real question here. So their phones have now been confiscated. The judge did decide to now detain the defendants. They were previously released on bond or bail and able to show up to court after sleeping in their own homes. They are now being detained until this issue is settled, which is
Yeah,
a huge move as well.
yes. I would not do well in a I wouldn't do well I wouldn't do good in jail because you don't have the internet in your jail cell. I wouldn't be good in a situation where they take away your cell phone.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't perform. Although I can not have my cell phone on and I can certainly drift off, but that's like my security blanket, having my cell phone.
I think for all of us, right? You go home. I see all of these funny TikToks these days of you go from your day sitting at your medium screen while you're playing on your small screen to go sitting in front of the large screen while you're scrolling on your small screen. To have all of that taken away, these people know what you get done with court for the day. You go back to your, either some of them jail cell, but the jurors go back to their hotel room. No computer, no phone. It's a different world. But what a serious, and as you said, brazen situation that this was dropped off. Ring cameras, they know it was a woman in a long black dress who was driving a Mazda. I would argue that they probably have a pretty good idea of who this individual is that dropped it off and are doing some work there.
I missed that. They have an idea as to who it was?
I haven't seen that, but if they know that it's been 24 or,
I'm sorry,
30.
they have a description of the woman as
Yes, as wearing a long black dress and driving a Mazda is what I've read.
my neighbors drive a couple Mazdas. I should
I
see
drive
if
a
they have any.
Mazda.
Oh, really? Now,
Yes, I
again,
do.
you would not, you'd be the last person that I would think that would be part of a mob effort to influence a jury.
I do want to give a shout out. You mentioned Max from The Reformer. Dina Winter on Twitter has an incredible thread detailing all of this that I would like to give a little shout out to. She is Dina, DENA Faye Winter on Twitter. It just really goes into all of the different specifics that have been released so far on this. She was following along as they were deciding whether to detain or not and sequester or not, and FBI being involved in getting these phones unlocked. And it's been watching with bated breath because it is a movie in writing. This has already been a crazy, wild case with so many millions of dollars being misused that were supposed to be going to feeding children in Minnesota and across the country. And there's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of individuals who have been implicated or are yet to be implicated in this massive multi-million-dollar scheme. A lot of people have a lot to lose. And so it's surprising, but not surprising. I've never heard of something like this, especially so close to it, that it's here and we've been watching this, and it's pretty bonkers. Closing statements, the attorneys did go on with closing statements yesterday. There's a lot more to come from what we'll hear here. And whether they find who was connected to this, how it happened, and who has hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash laying around.
This story is going to keep going.
Yeah.
Story is going to keep going. It makes me miss Ron Rosenbaum, who passed away a number of years ago. But his holding court, his legal takes, man, he'd be going crazy about this right now.
We'll obviously update as we know more, which could be by our next week's episode. So stay tuned on that. But speaking of millions, watch this transition here.
That's fantastic.
Justin Jefferson just got a contract extended. You're the sports ball guy. Tell us about it.
I'm the sports ball guy. Yes, I'm very excited about it. I was ecstatic about it. I'm very curious how that news, the reaction in your household to that news. As our listeners know, you are a pro Packers household. And so very nice of you to allow this to be as a person who does a lot of the partnership and planning the shows. It's very nice of you to accommodate a little pro Vikings news. I'm excited about it. It would have been devastating if he lost. If we lost him, he's here. I like the JJ and the JJ. I think this is just fantastic news. It's well deserving. He's a tremendous asset. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if he would have lost. But I am just really curious, just other reactions in your household about this? I know you speak for yourself, but I just want our listeners to know that your pro-Packer household, I have to believe that there was some frustrations maybe by some members of your house.
I would say frustrations and that were
Not your son. Let's be clear. Not your son.
No,
Yes.
the frustrations of the husband were shown to me by my question being dismissed. When I got home from work, I said, "How about that JJ contract?" And he just looked at me and walked into the other room. So,
Were you doing finger?
a
Like
little
finger guns?
dancing. Yeah.
That's
You
great.
got to. Hey, 140 million 4-year contract extension, 89 million guaranteed. He is the highest paid non-quarterback in the league.
I think it's absolutely fantastic that we have him. I'm excited. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Vikings do this year. I don't know how they're going to do this year, how they're going to be, what's going to happen with them. We'll see. But I'm very excited that JJ is a part of this franchise going forward. Deserved. I'm interested in the other JJ throwing him some passes. It's great. It's good news. And I think the real fight for me is going to be, what does this mean for the Packers? I had very similar just conversations with my wife. My wife is a Packers fan. And of course, your husband is a Packers fan. So a little bit of mixed households in response to this. But again, I'm excited for it. And I appreciate you allowing this to be discussed as we continue to go through. This is going to be interesting for you because of football. If we decide to still do the breakdown football, JJ might be part of that equation in some way.
Go. I like it. I was just going to say, it's nice to end the show. It's a pretty depressing episode so far.
The show's going to get a lot better for you because, and you're not aware of this, unbeknownst to our listeners, there's been some technical issues that we've been having on the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky over the last week or so that have largely been assigned to Becky. But halfway during the show, your esteemed co-host figured out it was on his end. And I want to apologize to Becky for any situation that was made towards me. It was completely on my end.
No way.
Yes. So here's the deal. I just got a new monitor and some setup stuff. And do you notice how we're not having any issues anymore?
Yeah.
I figured it out. And I absolutely could not, being the type of person I am, there's no way I could have not said that on air. I want to extend a sincere apology to you for any implication that it was your internet or something else. There was no finger pointing, but I just wanted to accept complete ownership that I figured it out in this episode. And that's why we haven't had any glitches remaining. It was completely and utterly my fault. I will accept full responsibility. And I want to apologize unconditionally to your household for any questions about your internet. Your internet is perfect. It's running smoothly. It was all a user error on this end.
That's very kind of you. And I'm sure the great people at Xfinity are glad that you also shared. So I did not give them an earful about my new router that I just installed. So thank you for that.
Your reaction is great. Your reaction was great. You were not surprised. You were surprised by that. Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's totally on mine. I totally figured out. I feel like such a horse's ass. I'm so sorry, but I totally figured out. So we're great. We're aces.
Ready to go. Bringing in another episode here in the next couple of days.
All right. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can leave a review or give us a shout out on our website or across all social media platforms at BB Breakpod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you again for listening.